I thought it was a really good idea to start by insulting the audience, just to sort of wake us all up. I was asked to do this talk a few months ago, and I spent, like anybody who's asked to do a talk, the last few months figuring out what to talk about, and then sort of wrote it last week. And what I want to do really is sort of talk about things I've learnt over the last 2 years. But first, I think like anything, these are really the two questions I ask myself pretty much every morning when I wake up. Who am I? So also, can you still hear me? I like to walk around when I speak. I'm now a CISO, and I have been for the last 2 years. So what I want to talk about, as I said, is kind of the things I've learned for those last 2 years. Prior to that, I was a pen tester. I sort of ran pen test businesses, that sort of thing. Why am I here? I'm here to tell you about that. I've been doing security for 25 years, and I thought with this talk I could do something technical and pretend I'm still technical, but I'm not, so that wouldn't work in front of this audience. So I'll try and give you the benefit of what I've learnt in the last 2 years. And it kind of turned out that most of what I knew in terms of doing security on the inside, if that makes sense, was fairly wrong. So this is what I'm going to try and do. Explain the things that I've been up to. I'm a CISO in a retailer, and I think it's fair to say that 2 years ago, security wasn't really a thing. So the first thing I had to figure out how to do was how to actually make it be a thing. The second kind of key lesson that I've learned over the last 2 years is actually getting stuff done is really quite hard. In fact, I'm a lot grayer now than I was 2 years ago. It is staggeringly hard sometimes to get things done. And perception is fact. I mean, you can sort of debate this in the world we live in at the moment. What digital, I think, has done, and this is much broader than just my job, is actually turn perception really, truly into fact. You hear stories of fake news and so on. And I think what's happened is people are confusing opinion with fact. And if something's said enough times online, it sort of becomes true. And this is creating, I think, a really, really interesting atmosphere in which we try and do our work. So, lesson number one that I've learned, maybe 70% of it, is how to make security be a thing. Doing the security stuff, I think, was, in inverted commas, easy. Because I like to think after sort of 20 years, I have at least some knowledge about what security means. But sort of making it be a thing in a large corporate is quite difficult. Because for something to be a thing, and this is going to sound slightly bizarre, it sort of has to exist. And there has to be a difference between what is security and what isn't security. So you sort of have to carve out a space for it to exist in. And in order to do that, there's a few key things. And these look like blindingly obvious statements. And in fact, they are blindingly obvious statements. But quite often, the blindingly obvious is completely overlooked. And certainly when I was on the pen testing and consulting side of the fence, they were overlooked, certainly by me. We need a budget. That's fairly self-evident. If you're going to do anything in any organization, you need the money to do it with. So the first thing you've got to figure out is how much money does one need in order to do what one wants to do, which means you've got to figure out what you want to do. And then you've got to figure out how much it costs. And then you've got to persuade the business to give you the money to do what you want to do. But the problem is you've got to explain to the business what it is you're trying to do. And when it comes to security, that's quite hard. So what do? Do you sit in front of the board and say, give me all this money and we won't have a breach? That would be a really bad thing to say. Because I suspect the vast majority of this audience could probably breach most companies if you sat down for long enough. So that's a statement that's not really going to get you the money, or certainly might get you the money in the short term, but you'll fail eventually. So you have to try and figure out a way of explaining to the business why it costs approximately 10 times more than they thought it would to get anywhere near to what they want you to do. And even that's not the end of it. So that was kind of problem number one. And specifically when I started where I am now, a large part of what is now the security budget that sits under me sat in IT. So I was effectively having to rob IT of money in order to secure their systems. So that creates, shall we say, the wrong kind of friction between the security team and IT, because they don't want their budget to be robbed because it's being compressed anyway. So that's tricky. Some of the other budget was managed through a project management office, so they would manage my capital budget for me. They'd provide project managers for me. Put bluntly, they'd give me far too many project managers and not enough security geeks to get the job done. So that was another problem. So I spent the last 6 months trying to get all this budget consolidated into one place so I can actually manage it. And we've sort of achieved that, and that's a good thing. The second thing, having got a budget, and again, this is a blindingly obvious statement, and this is going to be 40 minutes of blindingly obvious statements. You need to be able to buy stuff with that budget. This is particularly difficult. And again, you think this must be really easy because I guess a lot of you guys are in doing pen tests and things like that all the time, and you don't see what's going on behind the scenes. Procurement departments in companies, they're KPI'd on reducing cost. Now, surely as security people, we know that reducing cost increases risk. So this is almost entirely counter to what we're trying to achieve as a security team. So we go to procurement, and they're good people, they do a good job. This is not a criticism of any of my colleagues, but they want to run a tender process because it's what they do, and they want to get competition because it's what they do, and they want to find the right price because that's what they do. Fair play. However, if I want to buy a certain specific piece of technology from a small startup company that doesn't have any competitors in the market, having procurement spend 3 months looking for a competitor is a bit of a waste of time. But they have to follow the process anyway. A lot of this stuff, I think it's fair to say, was not entirely visible to me initially, and I'd wonder why things weren't getting bought quick enough. So I'd say to my guys, what's happening? And they're sort of chasing the procurement process around the business, frankly like a sort of rat trapped in a maze, trying to figure out why it's being blocked. I describe it as kind of wrestling matches between procurement people who are tasked with reducing cost and security people who I'm tasking with get this stuff in as quick as we possibly can. So that was interesting. So what we've done is we've had to build, or are in the process of building, a security-specific procurement process so that we can not necessarily bypass the controls because they need to be there, but so that we can get stuff in without having to go through competitive tender processes and looking for the best price and all that sort of stuff. So this took months. In the meantime, we've got a budget. We're not spending any money on anything. We're not necessarily doing security yet. What we're trying to do effectively is sort of build the interface between what security will be and the rest of the business. It's a strange one. And it struck me, actually, I was reading something in a magazine, I think it went Harvard or something, on the plane on the way up yesterday, and it was talking about doing agile at scale. Now, I'm not a developer. I was one a long time ago, 27 years ago. I started doing security 25 years ago because I realized I was a really crap developer. Probably crap developer, not half bad pen tester, I don't know. But in this article, it was talking about doing agile at scale and the fact that if you build part of the business that's using an agile methodology, that's going to get bottlenecked by all the other parts of the business that are still doing things in a kind of hierarchical command and control manner. And it struck me that actually what we do in security, particularly pen testing and security testing, is sort of agile. We find a load of things that are wrong and we try and fix them as fast as we possibly can, which is why stuff gets bottlenecked. So that just kind of made me think, and it's something I'm probably going to think about over the weekend as to how I can learn from what the developers do and how they interface with the rest of the business. I think we've got somewhere through this in order to buy stuff. But then what I've noticed now here, now I'm on sort of, if you like, this side of the fence. I could throw stones and say, no, I've got a real job and I used to be a consultant, but that's all just rubbish anyway because they're all real jobs. Just the hilarity of emails that come in trying to sell me things. They're brilliant. This one, I get an email from this chap, and fair play, he's trying to sell, I assume, what is quite a good solution. The email's very good. How many privileged accounts are active in your network right now? Well, loads. Privileged accounts are essential for day-to-day operations in all areas of IT. Attackers are aware of how important and how far-reaching privileged accounts can be. They are a golden ticket to compromise allowing total control of all resources in a network. Well, no shit, Sherlock. We know this. The problem is the subject line. When I look at my email on a Monday morning and I see that, it's bloody terrifying. Does it work as a sales technique? No, that's the first time I've read his email. I might go back to him actually and say, look, actually, you know what, I took the piss out of you at a conference, maybe we should meet. If you're in the room, talk to me afterwards. You need people. This is really, really, really obvious. And businesses are populated by people, not processes. Again, obvious statement. The trick here is that you need to get the people doing what you want them to do. And that's very difficult. And I found that one of the hardest things in the move from consulting into client side. And I think one of the reasons is in consulting work, there is a team of people who are tasked with a specific goal for a client. The deadlines are known, the team forms, and everybody, broadly speaking, is driven towards doing that one thing. So getting people to do what I want them to do or what the task leader wants them to do is a relatively easy thing. Because when it comes to review time in consulting firms, it's all about, did you keep the client happy? Did you hit the deadlines? Did the projects come in on budget? And so on. So there's a set of drivers sort of hanging over every project team in a consulting firm that are pushing them all in the same direction. And drivers are really important. But in client side, if you like, in industry, there isn't a common set of drivers because, I work for a retailer. That means, there's a blindly obvious statement coming up, that means we're not a security firm. So the drivers for the business are not necessarily about security. And the drivers for the board are not about security. Yes, they need to manage risk. But security to the board is another risk that they manage. In what we do, the key drivers are making profit, selling things in the stores, selling things online, keeping the shareholders happy, keeping the investors happy, that sort of thing. That's the drivers that are coming into the top of the company. And they spread out, and various teams, as I said, are driven by various different things. So I've talked about procurement and how their job is to keep the cost down. Finance's job is to add up the numbers and make sure we're hitting budget, and so on. But you also find in any organization that the real network is not what it says on paper. Because when you sort of dropped into a company as I was 2 years, and I love my job, please don't get me wrong. I think I really, 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 really enjoy it. It's excellent because it's hard. There are some people that have been in the job for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. These are really good people. Don't get me wrong. These are very, very good people. They're sort of, family men, family women. They want to do a good job. They want to provide for their children. They want to come to work. They want to do well. What they don't want is disruption, because it's terrifying. And I can understand this because I've been disrupted in the past, and it's not funny. They don't want this. They don't like change, not because they don't understand it, just because it's not what drives them. So you end up with a very, very, very tight, what's the word I'm looking for? Effective, informal org chart, where Bob will know Jim, who knows Mary, who knows Lisa, who knows Colin, who knows George, that can get something done. So something came up this morning, actually, funnily enough. I've got a contractor working for me on my team. I've extended his contract. Because I brought him in using my security procurement route, not the standard way we bring contractors in, we had a little glitch this morning. I've extended his contract, which means his user account needs to also be extended. Otherwise, on Monday, he can't log in, which means he can't do the stuff that I want him to do. HR, can we extend his contract? Yes, just go on to, I'm not going to say the name, just go on to the company that we use to bring all contractors in, and they will trigger the process in order to get his user account extended. He didn't come in through that company. What do we do? And this is the problem. So what I did is I used the informal org chart to get it done. So I'm now supporting the very thing that was working against me when I started. And this is tricky. This is really, really tricky to figure out how to deal with. And you just have to sort of work with it, and you have to sort of work against it. And hopefully, at the end of the day, something will happen. I like John Cotter quite a lot. He's written a lot of books on change, and I would sort of urge anyone here really to read Cotter. I'm assuming a large number of you will be aware of what he wrote. I think his kind of seminal work, if you like, is a book called Leading Change, and it talks about the 7 stages of change. You know, in any book written by an American, there has to be a number of stages that you go through. But to be fair, it's quite a good way of breaking a problem down. And I can't remember off the top of my head what all the stages are. But the key thing that always sticks in my mind is you have to articulate a vision of where you want to get to and keep reiterating where you're trying to get to. Otherwise, people forget why you're trying to drive the change, they get bored, and they go back to doing what they're always doing. He also talks about the fact that you have to get some early wins in, otherwise people don't see the change happening. And again, they get bored and going back to doing what they always do. Trying to sort of make security be a thing in any organization is actually a massive change. So continually articulating what you're trying to attempt to do is pretty critical. So I kind of refer back to Mr. Cotter quite a lot as a decent sort of guiding point, just to remind me that because we're not a security company, 99% of people in the company forget about security within about 24 hours. So I have to keep reiterating it, which is why awareness and culture is absolutely critical. I just really can't emphasize this enough. I'm a huge believer in the fact that human beings, I think, frankly, cause every security problem, which might sound slightly bizarre, but code is written by humans. So if the code's failing, there's a human at the root of it. Humans attack us, so it's humans. So changing the way that people think and the way that people behave around security is absolutely fundamental. And I don't think as a, and without sounding pompous or anything, I don't think as a society we've got anywhere near understanding what digital actually means. Most people's mindset is nowhere near figuring out what we're actually doing with all this digital technology. Things that I'm not here to talk about, but it might be fun, is why do we have to connect everything together? I don't get it. Why does everything have to be connected? It's bizarre. Surely the best way of protecting massive pieces of data is to not connect them to the internet if they don't need to be. If it's an internal system, why? You know, is the benefit really worth the risk? I do wonder if there's going to be a big push now to, you know, the digital disconnectors, let's call them. People who don't want their data kicking about in Cambridge Analytica or other companies. People that don't want massive online databases that can be hacked that contains their personal data. I think there is, you know, maybe on the, you know, the Gartner hype curve, we're kind of at the peak of inflated expectations, and we're sliding rapidly down into the trough of everything's being hacked and all our data's out on the internet for free anyway. So why not just put it there? Let's just put all our personal data on there and say, there you go. Make my job a lot easier. Politics kills anything, particularly in a large business. I mean, it's political by nature. Again, this isn't a criticism. I'm not going to go through any particular specific examples, but there are always senior level politics in any company. And one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years is sometimes you have to fight. This, again, is all pretty obvious. I mean, really fight. Sometimes you have to give things away. You absolutely have to choose your battles. You can't push on all fronts in one go. And this is something I'm constantly sort of telling my team to do. Look, don't worry about that. Someone will say, I don't know, there's a load of paper lying about on people's desks and we've got a clear desk policy, okay? That's bad, obviously. But how much paper? Well, it's about that much. How many records on that? A few hundred. Okay. Are you really going to pick a fight with that guy in procurement who's leaving that stuff on his desk when actually really what you want him to do is buy database access management products so we can protect 1 million records in the databases? So let's just choose the debate we're going to have with him. Are we going to give him a kicking for something? At which point, he's probably going to make our lives difficult. Now, I'm not having a pop at procurement. I like the guy. But I have to sort of advise my team, just be a bit careful what you're doing, because the person you're kicking today is going to be the person you really want to help you tomorrow. This was something I sort of didn't expect at all, and it's linked to the budgetary problem. There's just moral hazard all over the place. So moral hazard basically is sort of defined as making decisions that won't really affect you in the long term. So for example, moral hazard is something the banks look out for. It's effectively gambling with other people's money. In my environment, it's a part of the business that is doing something, and I have this conversation quite regularly, and I'm saying, look, we've got to look at what we're doing from a security perspective. If we're going to I don't know, put this new system in, open these stores, whatever it is, we need to make sure that we do this in a secure way. Oh, but that's your job, Paul. I thought that we do it and then you come along and sort it out afterwards. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Oh, but we've already signed the contract. So I didn't see that contract, so I really don't know what you're doing, and it all looks, reasonable, but I think there's going to be some holes in it, so we've got to come and sort it out. Well, that's your problem, Paul. We're going to hit our revenue targets and our budgetary targets, so no problem. So I'm trying to figure out a way, and I haven't got the answer yet, of putting some security targets or some security drivers in place to try and catch the things the business does that it just assumes that we're going to come along and sort out. Again, this is not a criticism. This is about sort of whole-scale change in people's thinking, so that stuff is sort of baked in from the top. If we do this, we have to understand the risks inherent in doing it, and we have to pay as necessary to mitigate the risk. The most common conversation, actually there's two really common conversations that I have. The first one is, well, we're doing this, and I'll be sort of at a meeting talking about what the business is going to do, and I'll say, well, actually, broadly speaking, it's going to cost X million quid or whatever to build security in. Well, that's what your budget's for, isn't it, Paul? No. My budget is there to do sort of operational security and effectively transformation across the piece. My budget isn't a pot to be robbed whenever the business wants to do anything in year, because I can't predict what it's going to do, so I couldn't possibly assemble a budget to do that at the start. My general response is, if the business wasn't going to do this, would we have to pay to secure it? If the answer is no, then it's not my budget. It's got to come from the budget, the asset budget, if you like. The second most common email I get is, Dear Paul, we really support what InfoSec are trying to do, and obviously we know that we've got to mitigate the risk and we've got to protect the business. However, my particular project is going to generate 10% incremental revenue in year, and Y%, 5% for argument's sake, incremental profit in year. And it really has to go live on Monday. Your team have identified some problems with it, and they're saying it can't go live. Can I have a security exception? No, you can't. You just can't. I used to. They've calmed down a bit now because I think I've got across a lot of the business, but I used to get those sort of emails on about a bi-weekly basis. And if you start giving security exceptions to everything, you sort of end up with a colander, and that's not a very good place to be. So the second thing I learned, I've probably covered some of this in what I've been talking about already, is that getting stuff done is actually just really hard. There's no other way of putting it. It's just hard. Because, as I said, I'll probably cover some of these slides. The business does do dumb things. And this is exactly what I was talking about with the email I keep getting. The main one we get is, well, we have to keep the business running, so we can't shut this thing down to upgrade it or patch it. Well, we've got over that hurdle, and now we can do that. The 15 million quid incremental revenue, as I said, I get those emails about, not as often as I used to, but I used to get them a couple of times a month, excuse me. The CEO has asked for this personally. That's a good one as well. I get that a lot. The CEO's asked for this personally. I'm sure in some sense he or she has. But actually, what they haven't specifically asked for is to take liberties and take risks. So in another very real sense, She hasn't asked for this personally. Quite often, it's very easy to get caught in a sort of escalation game. So I'll have my security analysts working with project managers or doing whatever they do. And the project manager will write my analyst an email saying, well, you know, we're going to have to try harder to get this live on next Wednesday because insert name of very senior director here needs to see this live and is going to be very annoyed at you if it doesn't happen. I've told my guys just to escalate that straight up the chain if it happens. We have a process where we sort of risk assess things. This is nothing particularly rocket sciencey. We have a process where there's a risk assessment at the start of a project. And if we get those kind of emails and people saying, well, we're going to have a security exception, we write back and say, yeah, that's fine. Let's just have a half-hour chat about it. And we put the risk assessment in front of them. So, well, these are the risks that we've identified. And these are the controls that we need to put in place. And one of the sort of first things I did was put in place a whole sort of, you know, risk governance piece with what grade of person can sign off which type of risk. So we put the risk assessment in front of the project manager and say, that's fine. You know, it's our job to advise and guide on security. And in this instance, we recommend strongly that you put these controls in place. Otherwise, you're taking a risk. It's not my job to decide decide what risks the business should take. That's the job of directors and the board and so on. So we say to the project manager, well, here's the risk assessment. As you can see, these are the risks. We're recommending you mitigate them. If you don't want to, that's absolutely fine. But as per the guidance here, you're going to have to get sign-off from the ExCo or from the PLC board. So, you know, I'm happy to come in front of the board with you and support you and say, this is my opinion, and this is what you're asking to do, and we'll see if the board makes the decision. Okay, Paul, I'll tell you what, let's put half an hour in tomorrow and have another chat about this. Okay, magic. Tomorrow comes. Hey, Paul, yeah, I found some more budget, and we can deploy these controls. Yeah, we reckon we can get them in by Wednesday. Easy. It's about getting the decision-making in the right place and making, if you like, I think of it as a sort of the common point of ancestry in the org chart. Who is the right person to make the security risk versus gain for the business decision? And we've tried to identify those people and push the process so that when the project manager is trying to take liberties, they know they're going to go and have to ask someone and explain why they want to take a risk and possibly expose the business. The last one on this is that we've done it that way before, is just that, you know, we all know this one, it's really, really hackneyed. One of the things we're trying to do, and as a strategic goal, if you like, for security, is to not do anything that would downgrade our security. Okay, so you kind of incrementally improve. So if we replace something with something else, we make sure that something else is going to be more secure, which does cause a few ructions. And quite often we just get the thing, well, you know, Bob's doing it like that over there. Well, that's fine, but if he was slapping himself in the face every morning for half an hour, would you just do the same? Well, crack on. Or, well, that's the way we've always done it. But surely that's the absolute reason not to do it that way, because that's the problem, and that's kind of why I'm here. And that's why I've spent the last year trying to fight, you know, get a budget and do something to sort this out. So if you like, they're the kind of 4 key reasons that people come to me with as to why they don't want to do security. We are slowly winning. I'm not suggesting that we're not. This was the one that as an ex-pen tester, and this next sort of little section is quite pen testy, because I love pen testing. I think it's great. Actually, it's just brilliant. But vulnerabilities, how do they actually get fixed? When I was a pen tester, you do a pen test. And my pen test vintage is you know, if we kind of wind the clock back about 17 years, year 2000, 2001, 2002, and give me the Unicode standard, I could probably hack an IIS4 box. But, you know, and I did buy the Unicode standard back in the day. It was a riveting read. And actually does go a long way. If anyone here, and there's a lot of young people, I'm now old and grey, I almost urge you to read the stuff about what Microsoft did when they were solving the Unicode vulnerabilities, because it was a very, very good tale of not fixing the root cause. when you're into kind of double decode vulnerabilities and things like that. Anyway, vulnerabilities get fixed by IT people, okay? That's fairly self-evident. I used to put a pen test report in, you know, here's a bunch of things that need to be fixed. Go back 6 months later, do another pen test. Oh, hang on a minute, this kind of looks pretty similar to the one I did 6 months ago. I'm sure the situation is a lot better now, but I know it's not completely solved. IT people have to fix vulnerabilities. You have to put it in the queue, the IT demand queue, to get something fixed, which is not necessarily the right way, because the problem with IT people is they're generally quite busy wondering why something's gone offline. So you think, okay, let's just look at fixing the really critical stuff, because that's the bit that we have to deal with. Absolutely. The mediums and the lows, fine, we'll put them on the pile and we'll get round to those. But I'm really worried about the super critical stuff. But IT people are really busy. They're always, the thing that I've learned as well, actually, is that the digital economy, it's not really that digital, to be honest. It's held together by a bunch of people sat in rooms looking at massive screens, waiting for a red light to come on somewhere, and then frantically fixing it. That's how digital works. It doesn't work by being digital. It works by people who are drinking a lot of coffee. So a better question to start asking is, how fast are we fixing the critical vulnerabilities? And this is something where we've simply had to inject more pace into what we're doing. And I think this is something that when I speak to other sort of people in my position, this is something we all wrestle with, is how to get the stuff done really, really fast. Because if we're not careful, we get caught in queues of change requests and IT demand and all that sort of thing. So coming back to the point I made about Agile, I'm trying to start adopting a more Agile approach to fixing critical vulnerabilities with sort of squads of people who are going to fix stuff and people that are going to find the problems and so on, and trying to sort of learn from what the software development community have done in order to just inject pace into things. But this means we sort of have to go round change request queues, which does make life a little bit difficult because there are certain things that we need to inform IT that we're doing. We simply can't go in and mess with the stuff because it'll probably break something. So this is quite a difficult one to crack. I'd like to get the critical fix time down to about 24 hours. On the basis that it's internet facing and a pen test has hacked it, then probably someone else has. And that's really quite terrifying. The other piece I sort of had to learn a lot about was how penetration tests actually happen when you're on this side of the fence. Once you've gone through procurement, we refreshed our pen test suppliers. We've got a sort of mechanism where we have 4 suppliers and we allocate work and so on and so forth. But then I had to deal with the absurdity, and it is an absurdity, of raising a change request when I wanted to do a pen test of our internet-facing systems, which honestly, I banged my head on the desk on that one. That was just bonkers, you know. And this is basically what I say, and this is actually what I'm going to start distributing around the business now, I think. Because why do I have to raise a change request to do what many people are doing to our systems anyway? I just don't get it. There's so many arguments. If I do a pen test and the pen tester knocks it over, at least we knocked it over, and we can hopefully get it back up. Having said that, I have a good degree of sympathy for the IT people, buried as they are under racks of spaghetti, and why they want to know what I'm doing and when I'm testing the systems. And this is sort of my plea, if you like, to the pen testers amongst you, and how you can help people like me and how you can help people in my team. And a key one sort of with regards to change requests and the raising thereof before I do a pen test is number 7. And I can't stress this enough. You've got to make us really comfortable that you're not going to cause a P1 outage. Okay, because in IT world, yeah, there's security high priority, obviously. There's also system outage high priority. There's a problem with a replatforming over the weekend in another company. I'm sure you saw it on the news. They are having a devil's job with their new platform, and they absolutely have my sympathy. It's a horrendous position they're in. System outages these days are huge. And in fact, as I'm sure you're aware, the GDPR now is shining a real spotlight on availability of data, and there's going to be some fairly meaty fines for companies whose kit falls over, which, you know, arguably, on my side of the fence, is going to make IT even more itchy about getting pen testers in, because there's going to have to be a balancing decision about, is it worse to knock something over for 2 hours or lose a little bit of data? I don't know. I think this is going to be thrashed out in the courts for quite a long time to come. A nice second career as a lawyer in this field would be quite lucrative. So pen testers, please engage with our incident response processes, engage with our service management processes, understand how they work, and understand, you know, that if you're testing something and you're I don't know, fuzzing the hell out of something, and the site suddenly becomes a bit laggy, and you're thinking, oh crap, what have I done? Don't just kind of hit escape and Control-C and stop what you're doing and then say nothing. Tell us, right? Please. Because at that point, we've got guys in an ops war room going, oh God, what's happened? Trying to find the problem. And then what happens is they find the problem and they track the IP that it's coming from, and they come to my team thundering, literally, saying, your pen test has just knocked over the site. But this process could take 3 hours of fault finding. But if you just phone us up and say, look, old boy, might have given you a bit of a problem, we can fix it really fast. And it makes my case for doing pen testing that much easier. You know, things are going to go wrong. And particularly on internet-facing systems, as I said, with system outages arguably being as bad as data losses potentially going forward, we need to know what's going to make the site laggy. I'm not going to go through all of the rest of these. I'll just pick out a couple of really key ones. Consistency with titles of findings. I would like to see consistency across the whole of the pen testing industry. I know you do CVE references and things like that. That's all fine. But even just the way that the things are worded, so we can get the same company testing the same system, finding the same vulnerability, but calling it two fairly different things. Now, on my team, we understand that they're the same because we're in the subject domain. When we take them to IT, we then have to explain that these things they're seeing that look different are actually the same. And that just takes time, which kind of goes counter to my concept of reducing fixed time for critical vulnerabilities. So anything that requires a level of discussion wastes time. And one thing I think that sort of I've observed after a length of time in security is that sometimes we can be a bit rubbish at explaining what we do to other people. We get too technical, we use too much jargon. Most people don't care, they just want it fixed. So I think there's got to be a sort of industry-wide effort to bring a lot more consistency and make us easier to engage with. Number 6, I want to just comment on quickly. When we get a pen test report, the executive summary, yeah, it's interesting, but straight to the table, here's the red ones, here's the yellow ones, IT fix them. That's it. We don't necessarily read all of the reams of descriptions of vulnerabilities because in the main, we're finding the same types of vulnerabilities many times. There has to be a better way of distributing findings. You know, I know some companies, the pen test findings go straight into a demand queue and raise a ticket straight away to get it fixed. Not all companies are as sophisticated as that. But there is opportunities and money to be made for pen testing companies to come into the client and help us build a process end-to-end that deals with this. The last one, I think, is really critical. No pun intended. Need to be really clear about what constitutes a critical finding. I have a guy on my side who upgrades quite a lot of findings in pen test reports when he receives them and downgrades a load of others. We're trying to get our suppliers to come and work with us to put together a consistent way of rating findings. And I would like to get them in and brief them on the business and for us, what actually constitutes something that's really going to hurt us. Because it doesn't always, or rather there's not always a direct match from what's in the pen test report to what we consider to be a significant risk. And the worry here is not necessarily things being overrated, although that obviously takes time when we fix stuff that possibly we don't need to, if that's a reasonably true statement. The worst one is actually when there's findings that are underrated, and as a result are not necessarily going to get fixed as fast as we need them to get fixed. I guess what I'm saying here is also try not to cry wolf too much, because IT don't like that. They have enough to do keeping everything up and running. So I have to be really careful as to what I raise as a critical finding and how, if you like, how loud I sound the klaxon. And there is a real balancing act here in terms of sort of keeping the business, shall we say, alert enough to the problems, or keep raising the alarm and get into the trap of crying wolf, and then when something really does happen, no one's actually listening. So on the communication point, and this is sort of particularly when talking to senior folk in the business, something that, this is John Cotter again, something that addresses people's anxieties. So a pen test report is a list of anxieties. And it talks in big technical jargon about how to address those, but they're not necessarily understandable to a lot of people. And what makes, if you like, this sort of lay people who are not in security, but who are very clever people and very senior in businesses anyway, what makes them more anxious than anything is knowing there's something they should be anxious about, but not understanding it enough to understand how anxious they should be. That makes them more anxious, and leads to me and my team trying to explain what this actually means. So we just simply have to get a lot better, I think, as an industry at explaining exactly what we do. Findings have also got to be credible. A lot of sort of, business management there is a lot of gut involved in it, because a lot of it is making decisions based on risk and uncertainty, which by definition is not a deterministic process. You have to effectively place your bet and hope that things go the way that you predicted they would, which is gut. And sometimes I think as we're very technical people. I'm a lot less technical than I used to be, but I still have technical personality traits, which means things that don't fit into nice compartments scare me. But I'm having to talk to people whose things don't fit in nice compartments and figure out a way to sort of make that interface work. I was a consultant for 20 years. I'm sure I had some really good ideas, but things are just very difficult to implement. I'm not going to say a lot more than what's on that because I've kind of talked about it for the last 20 minutes, but this is really critical. I think there needs to be a lot more support sometimes in actually getting things done rather than just raising a list of things that need to be fixed. Quite often you can get to a point where the last thing I need is another list of things to be fixed, and if I don't need another list of things to be fixed, you can sure as hell bet that IT need it even less. This is obvious, right? But I work in retail. That's the biggest threat I have. That is the biggest threat I have is Christmas. Okay, Black Friday. Who invented Black Friday? I mean, really? We have to run, with an order of magnitude more capacity through Black Friday and Christmas than we do for the rest of the year. I can't, I don't know if any of you have seen Spinal Tap. Surely some people are old enough to have seen Spinal Tap with the guitar. And don't look at it. Don't even breathe on it. That's what IT is like over Christmas. Because, so here's how the maths works, right? We have to have enough capacity to sell as much stuff as we're going to sell online as we go through Christmas. Christmas, from Black Friday through to sort of, broadly speaking, the back end of the January sales is our busiest time. It is in every retailer. Black Friday, incidentally, is called Black Friday because traditionally in the US, it was the day when retailers' accounts went into the black. Okay, so it's massive. Christmas is massive. The whole of the year is about preparing for Christmas. So we have to trade through with enough capacity to get things working to their peak. So we have to try and predict how many people are going to buy stuff and yada, yada, yada. And then buy just enough capacity to serve that. If we're 10% spare capacity, that's 10% wasted money. That's CPU we don't need. It's memory we don't need. It's network bandwidth we don't need. It's stuff we don't need. So IT do a lot of work trying to predict exactly how much capacity we're going to need. And this is the bit that sort of admittedly was quite new to me. There's a lot of load testing before then. We'd literally thrash the hell out of the websites with load tests. See which part of the whole chain falls over. Is it the load balancer? Is it the firewalls? Is it the front end? Is it the whatever? Right, that's hit 100% CPU here. The rest of it's running at 50%. That's unbalanced. That's wrong. So literally everything in the whole econ pipe is thrashing away at 90-odd% through Christmas. So I can't get any changes done. And when I have, let's say, an urgent need for a pen test in October, then I really do have an urgent need for a pen test, and it can't wait until December because I can't do it then. And that means we're trading through Christmas with an uncertainty, which is not a good thing. Christmas is great, actually, in retail. It's genuinely really exciting because of all the work you have to do to make all this stuff actually hold together. But I will implore you to kind of know your client and understand what their business cycles look like. Other sectors in retail, Easter, DIY sector, that's their biggest piece, not Christmas. So over Easter, everyone's got to go out and mow the lawn and, like I did, buy some barbecue cleaner and buy some steak and have a barbecue. Isn't it obligatory in any talk at a conference like this? You've got to have Anonymous, you've got to have Keanu, got to have Mr. Robot. Who thought Series 1 was great, but Series 2 lost the plot a bit? I got to episode 3 on Series 2 and sort of gave up. If anyone comes and says, actually, it gets better after that, like Breaking Bad did in Series 2, then let me know. And War Games, which, how about a nice game of chess? This is a really good book, actually. You must be aware of this. I'm sure you are. I'm sure it's shown every year here. But please read this. It's still really good. It's still relevant. It's all really old Unix stuff and rattling keys on bare wires to disrupt the attack, which is an interesting thing. Because if anyone has read Lockheed Martin's intelligence-led network defense, disrupting attacks is a good thing and is a strategic decision. I wouldn't rattle keys on the racks anymore. That would annoy IT. But it's definitely worth having a read of that book, I think. And then you can read his second book called Silicon Snake Oil and laugh at how wrong his predictions were. But then think, oh, hang on a minute. We're about to fall into the trough of disillusionment with digital, and maybe Cliff was right all along. We're starting to circle in on our upcoming London dinner. This was another sales email. I just really liked that. Starting to circle in on our upcoming London dinner. I also learned that perception is fact. The board are absolutely listening. Please, consultants, don't come and say to me, how I can get your board interested in cyber. They are. They really are. And they are genuinely worried about it. Absolutely. And the reason they're so worried, as I said, is because they don't know how worried to be. I probably covered a lot of this sort of in my rambling just now. But we've got to be able to articulate it properly. We have to have a consistent way of talking to the board. This is critical. For one reason, I wouldn't say one simple reason alone. One reason is a lot of boards of large companies, the directors and the non-exec directors, have chairmanships and roles in other companies. So they'll go to company A, and the CISO or whoever will kind of present what they think the risks are around cybersecurity in a format that to them makes sense. And to be fair, in a format that over time they've discussed with the board the best way to present it and the way that the board can consume. And then, the chairman of the board of that company will go and take up his non-exec director on the audit committee of another company and have some papers talking about cybersecurity risks in a completely different way. So he or she just simply don't know what they're supposed to be reading and what they're supposed to be taking away from it. One of the things I sort of talk to people in my position about is how we get to a point where we can actually report in a consistent way. If you're an accountant, you have to write the accounts and audit the accounts according to GAAP, which is the generally accepted accounting principles, I think. Any auditors shout at me if that's wrong. We sort of need the generally accepted principles for explaining information security risk. It's not really as natty as GAAP, is it? But we need something where there is a standardized way of reporting this and also accountability, so that there is a sort of equivalent to an audit partner, for example, in a Big Four, that signs the accounts off and says these are a true and accurate representation of the, I'm not sure what the wording is, the state of the company at the point in time at which I sign these accounts off. There needs to be an equivalent, I think, for the way that we deal with InfoSec. I think as an industry, we've done a really, really good job at figuring this stuff out as we've gone along. And now is the time when if we're going to be absolutely taken seriously in the boardroom, we have to professionalize ourselves, and we have to be consistent, and we have to hold ourselves to account in the same way the accounting profession does. And actually, the accounting profession, the legal profession, the architects, engineers, nurses, doctors, pilots, anyone in a position of responsibility in any other industry has professional credentials that they can be stripped of if they misrepresent something. It doesn't mean that the FD gets stripped of his credentials if the company goes under. That's not what it means. What it means is that if it goes under and he's misrepresented the facts, he's probably got a problem. I don't think we hold ourselves to account in anywhere near the same way, and I think we need to. We write things like this. and apologies to the companies here, I'm sure these are all pretty good pieces of research. Share prices drop an average of 5% when a data breach is disclosed. Share prices fall by an average of 1.8% on a permanent basis following a severe breach. Stocks on average suffer an immediate decrease in share price following a breach of 0.43%. In the long time, share prices continue to rise on average, but at a much slower pace. Now, can anyone tell me by how much the share price drops on average 6 months after notification to the Information Commissioner? Can't find it out from that. So what can I say to the board? Well, there's some research that says probably somewhere between 0.43 and 5% over an indeterminate length of time, your shares might drop, but actually they'll continue to rise anyway, but at a slower pace compared to something I don't know about. Remember John Cotter? How does this address the board's anxieties? Are these credible? They might be in and of themselves, but as a mess of reports, is that credible? As an industry, is that credible? The last thing I want to talk about is this, is the media. A breach story is brilliant, right? It's cyber, it's digital, it's exciting, it's hackers, it's North Korea, it's Russia, it's brilliant. The FT love it, and the BBC love it. But it's a really, really febrile atmosphere. And in the scale of sort of breaches, sometimes a company hasn't done what they should have done. Absolutely, the control environment is not in place. Sometimes they have done all of that, and they get hacked anyway, and there's a massive breach. And there's one simple reason why this is that and you know this better than anybody, the adversaries have a mission objective, and they won't stop until they achieve it. So by definition, they are going to get there in the end. And this is something I think that it's going to take a while to sink in to the sort of public consciousness and for the media to kind of understand the nuance in this. But at the moment, the atmosphere is so febrile that sort of, and this relates back to my crying wolf point, that it's very, very easy to cause emotion right at the very point when emotion is the absolute last thing you need. If you think about the airline industry, clearly there's emotion when an aircraft goes down. Obviously, it's a tragic event. But what happens then is there is the Air Traffic Investigation Board, or I can't recall what they're called. They come in as an independent entity, and they figure out what happened. And they don't stop until they get to the absolute root cause of what happened in that accident. It's not investigated by the aircraft manufacturer or the airline or anything like that. It's investigated by an independent entity that has the, what's the word I'm looking for? Teeth is the wrong word, but has the right powers to demand things are provided to it and to work through it and as much time as it needs to actually get to the root cause of the problem. And then they have the powers to order the airline manufacturers or aircraft manufacturers or airlines or whoever put in place the remedial actions. And they actually try and figure out genuinely what went wrong. They don't just sort of guess at it a bit and say, well, there's a few things in ISO 27001 that were amber and not green, and therefore that must be the problem. It's probably not the problem. And I think we've just got to get a lot more, collectively, a lot more science around the way that we deal with breaches and the way that we sort of allocate, if you like, blame and cause. This slide's broken, which is slightly irritating. That's supposed to be a slide showing the number of data breaches from 2005 to 2017, just increasing like this. And this is the sort of thing that, this was someone in our industry put it on LinkedIn. Number of data breaches since 2005 to 2017 has increased markedly. Well, the slide doesn't work so well because it's broken. But I wanted to show a comparison. So the picture on the left should look very similar, and if not identical, to the picture on the right. The number of internet users has gone up hugely since 2005 and 2017. So simply saying the number of breaches has gone up from 2005 to 2017 doesn't really tell us anything. What if you control the size of breaches or the cost of breaches or whatever for the number of people on the internet or the number of devices connected to the internet, and then have a look and see what breaches are doing? I don't know. But we need to have some clever people doing things with data and actually trying to figure stuff out. So I think there needs to be much better education into the public in a way that they can consume so that they can understand sort of what digital security is all about. I mean, I just use fake news because it's funny. And this is a big problem. I think people are starting to understand what fake news is. I remember talking to people a year or so ago about sort of Russian troll farms and this sort of thing, and they're like, really? And now it's in the media and people sort of get it. It's difficult to know how to conclude this, apart from Donald Trump, obviously. You know, let's just move on. This was the best sales approach I had, and I will sort of finish here. Didn't work, but it's the best one. Hey, Paul, how's you? Can I give a quick call? And if so, when? What number's best for you? Kiss. Brilliant. So I think to sum up what I've learned over the past couple of years, in many ways, is that sort of the role of the CISO is to represent security to the business and represent the business to security. So one thing I've sort of figured out is that I'm pretty much always devil's advocate in any room I sit in. If I'm sitting with the business, I'm arguing as to why we need to do more security and why we need to manage the risk. If I'm sitting with my security guys, I'm sort of arguing why the business can't just turn off the website on the 24th of December and that we're going to have to trade through. That was me. I think I'm done. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Any time for questions?